Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Canadian jazz drummer Harry Vetro. He talked about his debut album, 2018's Northern Ranger. It tells the story of his travels, and it's deeply personal about this country that he loves, and he traveled as a whole, Canada. He currently leads a monthly residency at the Tranzac, Toronto's premier creative music club, featuring new compositions inspired by nature and landscape. So please get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Harry, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for reaching out. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to do this.
Let's dive right in here, and the very first thing that I want to ask you about is your newest album, Northern Ranger. Talk to me about this debut album and what your artistic vision was with it.
I guess back in 2017, around that time, I had been developing music for kind of based on the landscapes, and that's what was inspiring all the music I was writing. And so I had this grand vision that I wanted to kind of write music about the landscape of Canada, but I'd only really been, I guess, in Ontario and maybe Quebec, so I decided to just travel and write music, and I traveled from one coast to the other, and I went to some really far out places that are really isolated communities, and just kind of get an understanding for the landscape, and met a lot of different musicians, artists, and that kind of informed my work. And yeah, that's it was my grand vision, just trying to inform myself.
Yeah, that's cool. So, were you born and raised in Toronto?
Yes.
Talk to me about your childhood, how you got involved with music, and how you more specifically got involved with jazz.
Yeah, it all started, like, my dad's a musician. He plays guitar and sings, so and my mom's an artist, and they've been kind of inspiring me since I started playing guitar at age 3, and a couple of years later they put me in piano lessons to kind of get that theory background, and also they didn't let me continue guitar because my sister wanted to do it and they didn't want us both. It's kind of funny. And from there, I think I studied piano for about 13 years. Halfway through that, I ended up really taking to the drums. Like my parents thought at first it was a phase, but I just really enjoyed it and decided to go to high school arts program and studied classical percussion and kept that going. And while I was doing that, I was also playing in a band with my dad. We have a country rock band that we were playing the bars, and he got me doing that right around grade 8. So kind of started at a young age, and we're still doing that. And then I went to university, the U of T jazz program. Just finished that a year ago, and so now I just released this album. That's kind of where I'm at.
So what early jazz really kind of lured you in that made a big impression?
Definitely the improvisation, that whole part, the communicating with other people through improvisation. I love classical music and the whole thing about that, but I even remember from a young age just wanting to improvise and doing that. I remember playing everything by ear, wanting to do that thing, yeah.
Right on. What musicians did you listen to?
When I first started out, I was listening to a lot of like Charles Mingus. I remember that, yeah. That was a big one for me. And I think, yeah, John Coltrane, all the classics, like Miles Davis, checking out all his classic albums. Yeah.
Cool.
I think
cool.
Those three were big for me, and I think it was right as I was transitioning to university that I started really checking out all the drummers.
What did you learn in college? There's a lot of levels of education. Obviously, travel is a huge part of that, and then playing live. But in a formal university environment, what did you learn about jazz?
I was very fortunate at U of T. They kind of, because U of T is known for a very strict, it has a reputation of being a very straight-ahead school. They teach you all the theory, and they want you to put it into bop language, and that's the kind of the reputation I thought I was going into. But during my education, they were very they pushed just being a creative individual and like looking at one thing from all different angles. And yeah, that's a big thing, just thinking about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and yeah, just questioning everything. Yeah, and it kind of relates to all aspects of life. That's kind of what I got out of it.
Very cool. So, you know, this is your debut album. You've played, you know, at festivals and venues all over Canada. How is jazz doing in Canada these days?
I think it's doing great. There's a lot of really good musicians up here in Toronto and across the country too, right? I think the tough thing up here is getting an audience out. That's, I think, for the last while. I like there's lots of performances happening. Yeah, I think that's the one thing. It's nice to have that we have these. Like obviously, there's a lot more space in between the big cities compared to down in the States. So there's only like so many jazz clubs that you can tour to, right? But those ones have a really great listening audience. It's kind of like in Toronto, there's so much happening, and there's just music happening everywhere. And I definitely see it. That's the hardest part, is kind of getting people out. There's only maybe 2 or 3 clubs that have like some really good foot traffic and people that come out, and they're getting like people from across the country coming in and across the continent coming in. It seems to be thriving from my perspective.
Right on. So speaking of live performances and seeing concerts live, that's a huge part of our educational experience as, you know, participants. So my question is this: what jazz shows have you seen live that have left a really deep impression on you?
There's been some good out-of-town acts that have come through. I know, I forget if it was last year or the year before, Wayne Shorter's quartet came through. That was, really, really inspiring, all those guys in that group. And it was kind of funny because they'd came through a couple years before, and I remember, like, I was less informed of what they were doing, so during that concert I found it really hard. But then after kind of getting myself into more listening to jazz, I just was blown away by that concert and the possibilities of how they can communicate and weave through ideas. And yeah, it was a big thing. And I remember I came down to New York maybe a couple years ago, and I remember one show that really blew me away. It was a show that had that drummer Tyshawn Sorey in it. I think that was really a turning point for me, seeing that guy play and all those guys.
This is your debut album, and you're off and running. What does your future look like? What do you want to see happen, say, 10 years from now when you look back?
My biggest goal is to develop myself as both a drummer and a composer. I'm working on both those right now, and I mean the big goal is just to be playing bigger shows. A dream is to be touring through Europe and just doing that and making a living off of doing that. So let me ask you this generically: why do you love jazz? Just so much fun. I feel at the highest when I'm making jazz music and when I'm listening to it. It just feels right. Let me ask you this. Everyone has a version or a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but you know yourself best. Tell me, who do you think you are? I'm an explorer. That's kind of how I look at myself. Cool. And I'm always searching for something new, whether it be outside in landscape, and always trying to find a new place, never really wanting to revisit the old. Same for music. I like it. Cool. That's a great way, I think, that's a good note to kind of wrap everything up on. Harry, thanks for taking a minute to talk about Northern Ranger and your life in music. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for reaching out.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview. where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Canada, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Harry for his time, his class, and his cool. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.